So, to fully understand this, we need to go to the very beginning of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. Now, at some point, if you're trying to understand everything, you're going to have to take the time to read the Bible for yourself. As I was trying to think about this first little chunk, 1 through 4 is really full. Because I was like, oh, I'll just talk about 1 and 2, and I was like, man, there's this, this. Poof. So the very first part is just going to be God making man, and God making woman. And we'll stick with that for right now, and then kind of build on it from there. But what I want you to see is chapter 1. So if you look here, in Genesis 1, and you go down to verse 26, it's not that the rest of it doesn't count, it's that what we're looking for is the part where God makes man. So in this verse 1:26, it says, then God said, let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness. And if we just stop right there and we think, in our image, in our likeness. So this problem has come up and has been addressed by people in the past in several ways. One is ancient Anunnaki aliens. And if you were wondering, the answer is no for me. I'm a hard pass on aliens. Michael Heisner has his concept of the divine council. The Jewish Bible, I believe, Torah, will use like the word like Elohim, and they're able to use that understanding of Hebrew to kind of do some semantical movements that I don't think is necessary. I'm thinking the writer intended this to say our, more than one. So we got that. Then it says, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Now this is another thing that gets ignored, that always gets ignored. As far as I can tell, this phrase, fish of the sea, birds of the air, cattle, beasts of the field, is another one you'll see here in a second. Or beast of the earth, is these phrases are really common in Genesis, but they're also all over the actual Bible, like the rest of it too. So there's something else going on other than describing animals, and we'll get into that real soon. But I just want you to see that in chapter 1, verse 26, the multifaceted God creates, so verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. So God makes man in chapter 1, both men and women. Nobody's named, right? But it happens. And he says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. The thing that we've heard before. And then it says, have dominion. Again, it repeats these series of creatures. Fish of the sea, birds of the air, and a living thing that moves on the earth. And those are important, and we'll get into those after I kind of go through man and woman. So chapter 1, male penises, female vaginas, right? So this just is getting to the human males and females. Chapter 2 doesn't take quite as far to get there, and it says, before any of the plant of the field was in the earth, and before any of the herb of the field had grown, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. No man. But just a second ago, there was definitely a man and a woman filling the earth. So then they get here, and now there is no man. So God is upset also because there has been no rain. There was a mist that came up from the earth and watered the face of the ground. So a bunch of things are happening in this chapter. Holy cow, a bunch of things are happening. We're going to stick with the man thing for right now, but the water thing is equally interesting. So he makes man, and then he makes man, and there's the garden, and then all of a sudden he's kind of lamenting because God says it's not good that man should be alone, and I will make a helper comparable to him out of the ground. Again, so now there's ground references and water references. God formed every beast of the sea, that phrase again, the beast of the field, bird of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. So it is interesting that God doesn't call them anything, but he lets Adam call them things. And something else that's going to become central, key, pivotal, is an interesting thing has happened in the translation of the Bible. So the Bible was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, depending on where you're at and what time it was written. And then, in our case, English speakers have come along and they've translated the whole thing except for names. So I find it unbelievably interesting that the names of the people are just the names of the people. And you're going to understand that later. But in this case, you'll have to take my word on it for right this second. But Adam just means red, or red man, something like that. All right, so what I want us to do now is let's look at the story of the creation of woman, because it's very interesting. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam. He slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. So, couple of things. Number one, the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam. There's sleep and there's deep sleep. One could almost call that trance, a spell, a vision. Like a deep sleep has a bunch of connotations. But I'd say the most important overlooked piece is right here. And it says, and he took one of his ribs. One of his ribs. Now, growing up as a Baptist, I never heard or experienced the suitable explanation for what in the world this is. And there's several of these in the Bible that are kind of, especially in Genesis. We'll see another one with Jacob's hip later down the book. But what I've learned is when they're giving you visual cues, it's kind of a sign that you need to go look at the visual cues. So once I've did this, I think you're going to see it too. It's going to be like, you're not going to need me to explain this very much. Let me just say that. So I'm gonna transition over. So let's take a look at some ribs. So right here, these are ribs. And God took one rib, a single rib, right? This is what one rib looks like when peeled away from a rib cage. Take away the diagrams, you start to get a familiar shape. Boy, that certainly reminds me of something. Like, just imagine if we stuck that, a shepherd's crook. A shepherd's crook, right? This becomes a truly almost universal symbol of world religions. These first few just happen to be, oh look, there's Jesus, the good shepherd, right? Religions are shepherding the people. So if we think about this again, a rib, he took a rib. There's another Jesus. Even if you go way back, this is a little older, going back to ancient Egypt. You had the priest / king, Pharaoh. He had a shepherd's crook. Shepherd's crook. Babylonian. Oh, there's one too. This one now begins to incorporate some other symbology as well, but you get the king with the priest. Aztec. This is a Mayan. That's an Aztec. There's a Buddhist monk, right? It's not quite a crook, but there's always this universal staff. So you can begin to see the morphology as time goes on. There, even in, this is a pseudo-druidic character, Gandalf here with his little staff. You can't have a wizard without a staff, a wand. And then you'll see that as it morphs, it begins to take on sort of a moon-like character. And I think I'm going to hold off here for just a second. And I probably need to go ahead and explain to you what in the world I'm talking about, because it's fundamental that you understand this story. And it's fundamental you go look when they tell you look. He took a rib. Okay, so Adam, and this is where I think I might have glazed over this a little bit, but let's go back and take a look in the story, chapter 2, verse 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. Now, we said in the previous chapter he made males and females, so man in this context is something else. And when you die, right, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Man is dust. We are mere dust. So, if you form things of dust, And then I told you that water was a big component. So right before the dust talk, there's the talk of water. And in that sense, it was before the plant of the field was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown, for the Lord had not caused it to rain. There was no man, but a mist came up from the earth and watered the face of the whole ground. So I'm going to throw a bunch at you, because I told you there's a lot in these first 4 chapters, a lot. And it would really help me if if a church would teach you this stuff, but they don't. I don't think they know. They haven't really thought about it, but I'm just going to say what water is now. I'll prove it later, but for the sake of brevity on this video, water doesn't mean water. Man does not mean man. For example, I am not a man. I am a male in this story. I am a speck of dust, but I am not a man. We are men, or we are a man, but I am dust, and you are dust. So, water is knowledge, and if you think, and the Bible is like, understanding water is huge. There's a handful of these: water, wine, bread, oil. Like, you must really see that it's telling you a bigger, more important story. So the story of water is huge. So just in the little handful of verses so far in chapter 2, you had rain, mist, there's a river, and there was another one. So if you think about the water cycle, then you got fresh water versus salt water, and all of these mean something. So if we think about rain comes from on high down to the earth. But mist is kind of like dew, and it comes up out of the earth, is what it said. And it said, but a mist went up from the earth. So if we think of water as knowledge, a mist coming up from the earth, that is a primitive, low-level knowledge, right? So at this point in history, the only knowledge is just like primitive, subsistence level knowledge. Because God had not caused the high knowledge to come down. Right? It's a more interesting story. And in Eden, there was a river through the garden. And already a garden, you should think of, there's no such thing as a natural garden, right? Gardens are inherently cultivated. You must plant and weed and till and create from the wild a garden. So the water, the river flowed through the garden. And if you begin to, so there was a stream of knowledge that permeated the settlements of people that were beginning to subdue the earth. Right? So what you're looking at is man, which is formed of the dust. And the other one is, it says, like, Adam also means something like red clay, but man is made of clay. So it's dust and clay, which means if you take all the dust in and you add water, you now have the clay to form the man out of. And that becomes a little bit more profound when you understand that the water is the knowledge. So when you take a bunch of people if you gather the dust and add some knowledge, you now have a nation. Right? So Adam, man, is the people of a nation or a country or a tribe. So then God says, it's not good for you to be alone, to just be a bunch of people together. You need one more ingredient. I'm gonna put you to sleep. I'm gonna almost have you go through a ritual. And I'm gonna pull something out of you, from you, that is you. So I'm gonna pull a person out of a person. And to do that, I'm gonna do it in the form of a rib. I'm going to pull a shepherd's crook. I'm going to pull the belief system, the religious system out of you, from you, and I'm going to unite people with a belief system. And when you add those two together, you now have civilization. So the story of Adam and Eve is the story of civilization and how it takes people and culture. Usually the culture is defined and guided and ruled by a religious belief system. And I'm going to hold off on going that far yet, because you'll see when you get to chapter 3, that's for sure true. But chapter 2 is kind of like this interesting place, because if you even go into like a little further down, after Adam and Eve were born, now the bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman because she was taken out of man, right? So the belief system comes from the people. And there's no arguing that. So the people essentially create their own culture. And therefore, shall a man leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife, and they should become one flesh. So a civilization is both things. You cannot have a civilization without either one. But here's the beautiful thing, and this is why I'm saying I don't know that it's fully religion yet, as much as it is culture. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. And that'll make more sense as we go along. So if we double back to this little presentation here, I'm going to go back up to the very beginning, and we're just going to look at this one more time. So you have a group of people, and out of those people comes one rib. Out of those people comes one rib. Comes the shepherd, comes the guiding force, the culture. And almost every religious institution, almost universally, a staff with some kind of protrusion from it, often in the form of a shepherd's crook, is religion. The first few are Christianity, because it's not even hidden, even through Jesus. Ancient Egyptians, like I was saying, the Babylonians, even Aztecs, Mayans, Buddhists, pagan druids. But then something interesting also happens that kind of proves the point a little more, as you start to get these abstractions of the rib, and in this case it begins to take on almost like a moon-like shape. This is a carving of an early Canaanite Phoenician religious symbol, right? And you start to see how this woman takes on this moon aspect. This is another version of that same symbol. Even in Egyptian religions, you get this, right? You get this calf cow woman connection. You even get like the sacred cow, and it is, the stories let you know that it is responsible for prosperity and fertility and the overall well-being of the society. At the exact same moment, in other parts of the Mediterranean, you have other cultures also beginning to go down this cow road. So I have totally just taken you way, 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 way deep, but I just want you to see that this is not a small thing, right? This idea, we're just talking about 4 or 5 verses can take you miles if you let it. The Minoans, who were simultaneous with the ancient Egyptians of the New Kingdom, especially, worshipped the bull. It's well known. They had their myths were the Minotaur. They would have these bull leapers. Their entire temple, the labyrinth temple, was based on some of these rituals. Even at the end of the Egyptian portion of the story of the Hebrews, they rebel by returning to a golden calf, a golden calf of Egypt. The calf represented many, many things, and we will get deep into that. But ultimately, I don't want us to lose sight of the simple concept of when you take a rib, what that looks like and what that would mean in a larger context. So the rib is the woman, is religion, is culture. And just if you Google religion's role in civilization, it's right there. Religion is the prevalent, and the basic element in the building and establishment of all civilizations. If religion or religious thought is missing, no true civilizations can be built. But man needs a helper suitable to him. And I think that kind of sums up Adam and Eve, the story you've never been told. And we're going to get into the additional helpers that they were also given at the same time. And then we're going to get into the serpent in Eden and the forbidden fruit and what that also means. So you're going to notice I am absolutely not advocating for, in the distant past, a single human being called Adam and a single human being called Eve magically shows up in some earth recently created by a magical being called God. Instead, we haven't even got into God, and that will be unbelievably evident next time. But man, a collection of dust, a group of individual people that form a singular nation that needs a guiding cultural influence, marry each other to create civilization. And in this case, the first civilization. So, and just to even kind of drive it home a little more, if you go into that same chapter 2 and you really look what it's telling you, right before anything we've talked about, it says, this is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord made the earth and the heavens. Like, this story is the history of mankind. And I'm going to say this. That's going to become way more true than you can possibly get your head around. So I think everybody's comfortable with going, oh, it's a metaphor or analogy of civilization. That's cool. And it is cool. And it gets way cooler real fast. So that's lesson 1.